part of the agenda where you all take over. It's all about you. We're going to get some feedback from you on our 5 strategies. I'm going to ask you all to queue up in order so that we can do this in a time-efficient manner. If your table got really jazzed, and Pat, can we put the strategies up so people can have the numbers? About strategies 1, 3, or 5, I'd like you to go to that mic. If you got jazzed and you want to share some thoughts about strategies 2, 4, or 6, I'd like you to go to this mic. Here's what I'd like you to try to do in pretty short order. Tell us what your table saw as the biggest impact of the strategy and what you saw as the biggest barrier to making it happen. I don't want to have just robots at the mic, so. Right, so if you had strategy 1, you should be over here. Differentiated programs. Just keep rolling through them, Pat, so everybody remembers. Strategy 2, enhanced career pathways, project-based learning on the left. Over here, increased education system equity. Over here, strategy 5. Now let me say, I want you all to give us some feedback on the impact and barriers for these strategies. We will have a moment when this is over to talk about what's missing. I don't suffer from any illusions that we have covered everything that could possibly have been covered in a forum on the future of work. Quite frankly, as many of you can probably tell, my singular ambition is for my voice not to go out on me before 5:30. So, if I accomplish that, I'm a really happy person. Don't hesitate to start thinking about the things that you want to tell us later you really wanted to hear, but we just didn't cover in this forum, right? So for now, strategy number 1. To help me answer questions that you might have or to give some feedback, we've got a panel of folks. Let me just say, these are not people who are going to make presentations. I already promised this is your session, but they're here in case we need a little bit of fallback. So let me call Jose Picard, Professor of Education at the NC State College of Education, also the Executive Director of the Raleigh Promise, and a member of IEI's 2016 Forum Working Group. We also have Will Collins, Assistant Secretary of Commerce for the Division of Workforce Solutions and Executive Director of NC Works, an online platform for connecting North Carolinians to job opportunities. Dr. Sandra Merkel-DeJames, another member of our 2016 Emerging Issues Forum Working Group and a member of IEI's National Advisory Board. And finally, Carol Moore, the incoming director of STEM West, a really cool initiative at Catawba County School and a 2016 Forum Ambassador. Thank you all for joining me on the hot seat. Okay. Strategy number 1. Feedback, impact, barriers.
The barrier that we saw or talked about briefly is the training of students for the school to decide or for businesses to decide. This seems to indicate that industry would decide. So I'd like feedback. Is it a school decision or is it an industry decision for the training of our students?
Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Okay, well, I appreciate that's a very good question, and it's something that we're trying to address on a regular basis. I think it's very important for us to understand what the industry needs in order for us to help the job seekers. Because unless we understand exactly what's necessary to succeed going down the road, we're doing a disservice to the job seeker by not preparing them better for what their opportunities are. So I think it is imperative that the businesses share with us what their interests are, what their future looks like, and how they can prepare job seekers for the future. So I think it's very important to engage the industry and to make sure that we understand them clearly. And it's also, if I can just touch on that, I think one thing that's also very, very important is to do this on a local level. We need to reach out and use the resources we have in our local communities with the local businesses. We do that as part of our FutureWorks career centers. We have 80 career centers across the state, and we have representatives in those career centers that then reach out to the businesses. We do that through our workforce boards, our community colleges, DPI, economic developers. So we do that on a local basis. So it's very important that we understand, not just in Raleigh, and then think about what we should do. We actually need to do it on a local level in the local communities.
And I might add to that. I mean, ultimately, the schools decide. But it's a conversation and an exchange of ideas that has to take place and at every level. And if you think of the different layers in the system, you got the K through 12, you got the community colleges, you got, at each level, that conversation might be a little bit different. And the degree of influence that the businesses might have might be a little bit greater at a community college, for example, or some specific program that's training folks for a specific part of the sector of the business at a higher education might. But I think at each level, there's different conversation that takes place, and the degree of influence or exchange that business might have will vary.
Other feedback on strategy 1, impacts, barriers.
Hi. I think strategy 1 can have a lot of...
Introduce yourself so that everybody knows who's in the room, please.
Sure. Lee Shamblin from NC State University. I think that strategy 1 can have a lot of impact in terms of matching what's needed with what skills people have. My concern is that this is tailored primarily to higher education. And I think the statistic we heard earlier was that only 30% of the jobs actually require higher education. And so I'm wondering, how can we, Uber school or whatever, how can we help the education system be more entrepreneurial so that we can match skills and we can start training people early all along the educational continuum?
So just one clarification, because there's so many statistics that have been thrown out today. The statistics suggest that 66% of jobs will require some post-secondary education, but that does not mean a 4-year degree.
Got it.
Yes. Anybody want to respond?
I can respond to that. In the Hickory area, working with NC State actually, we've started the Future Engineers, and that is an extracurricular academic event, but those students are working on entrepreneurial events and activities. Oftentimes with project-based learning, that can also come into play. So it can actually be taken all the way down to kindergarten.
All right, let's take one more, strategy 1. Somebody who's got something different by way of impact or barrier. Yes?
Hi, I'm Ziad Ali from NC State. My question about strategy 1 is, isn't it threatening to the true goals of an education to say that industry should have this large of a role in determining what students are taught? Because isn't the goal of a college education to create holistically knowledgeable and individuals and critical thinkers who are often specialized in certain areas, not just people who are churned out like a factory to do one task? Why give industry this much power over what students are taught when it's teachers who often have the interest of the students at heart?
So, Jose, I think you intimated to that earlier,
Yes.
but do you want to take that on?
I think we have to think about the fact that there's a concept called equifinality, and that means that there's many pathways to the same sort of end or goal. And higher education serves many outcomes, and institutions vary in what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish. So you have Research One institutions that are trying to push, the knowledge and theory and all of that. You've got the community colleges that are preparing people for work, and in many ways, and that's higher education, right? So I think, and then you have liberal arts colleges, 4 years, that are doing a lot of what you're saying in terms of producing well-rounded individuals who go on to, be great citizens of the country. So I think there's multiple sort of ways that which our education system here in the United States can, accomplish all of those things. And I think the conversations with business obviously are important for many sectors within our higher education system. And that's sort of how I would see it.
All right, let's take some feedback on strategy number 2, either big impacts or potential barriers identified.
All right, my name is Tim Mathis. I'm with NC Works, and our table really felt like strategy 2, the development and implementation of enhanced career pathway initiative, could be very key. That, in fact, we said strategy 3, which talked about project-based learning, could be a part of that comprehensive career pathway. And if you developed a pathway that is understandable, something that makes sense to the parents and to the kids, and if you developed it not only for students, but for adult learners, for dislocated workers, and have multiple on and off ramps, so that if someone did not want to go through to a 4-year degree, but maybe there were job opportunities at the the 2-year level, the certificate level, or the diploma level, that pathway could encompass all of those. And as far as the barriers, we felt that the employer engagement has to be paramount, and we have to make sure that we talk to those employers, because ultimately our table felt the value of that education is really going to be measured by the jobs that are available for those job seekers.
So
That's our
Sandy,
input.
you've represented a company in one of our growing industry sector responses.
Sure. I think that I like the idea of the multiple on and off ramps in any type of career pathway that could be built. I think what's really critical, though, is to understand that we are coming upon a point in time where we will have significant change in terms of what our industry needs are. But what we see in the future is even more rapid change. And so any type of career pathway initiative that would need to be built would need to be flexible in terms of on and off ramps, but also would need to be flexible enough in that it's a platform that can also change rapidly over time. Because what we see right now in industry is that we're changing faster than we can impact the education system in their changes.
Thank you. Another person on strategy 2.
Sure. My name is Suzanne Killian, and I'm with Duke University. I was with a table that was very diverse, including industry, higher ed, education, et cetera. But the common thread was starting the career path earlier and to define that earlier for students. And not just students, but for educators and for the community and for industry alike. The barrier, though, that they had was how to induce those different stakeholders to collaborate and to share responsibility to increase that capacity and not just laying it on one group, such as teachers or the public education system.
Carol, you want to take that?
I do. Working with Steve Hill and STEM East, and now that we're starting STEM West, that's indeed what we're trying to do, to open those communications. I know what we've done for over 5 years is to take 8th grade students into the businesses themselves, which was a massive undertaking with our community college there, and Education Matters. But we got them in there because here's the problem. The teachers are doing a great job, but they go to college, we go in our classroom, and we teach. I had no idea what was in my own community. And these STEM tours that we did with the students, the teachers learned just as much. Now I can have conversations with students and say, oh, that's going on in your backyard. And those conversations have to take place because we do not know.
I think there's one other part too, and that is you ask who are the people that we need to engage. We have to stretch out, we have to reach out to the parents as well as the educators and inform the parents what the opportunities are and what the options are. That's something that a lot of schools are doing now, and I think it's very important that these students at an earlier age know what their options are, that they're I mean, when I was growing up, you know, one of the mantras for all parents was, you're going to go to a 4-year school. And I think that now we recognize that that is not necessarily the path to success, that, you know, everybody's a little bit different. And we have, for example, I have my 24-year-old graduated and has a graduate degree. My 20-year-old is a sophomore at state. But my 18-year-old figured it out. He's going into auto body collision repair. And he's working an internship. You'll find out actually today where his internship is, and that he's going to get a degree, he's going to get a high school diploma and a certificate in auto body collision repair. So we have to be able to address and make sure that students know what their options are. At the earlier age we can get the awareness raised, the better off we're going to be. So I think it's very important. Get the parents out and let them see what the manufacturing looks like, let them see what all the different options are.
Let's take one more on strategy 2, something different.
My name is Chris Bailey. I'm a career technical educator, education director for Craven County Schools. And I'd like to say that my friend from the NC Works department actually stole my answer, but that's okay. Because the Career Pathways Initiative is something that we have embarked on and have been involved with ever since the Harvard study came out. The realization of the Career Pathways piece for us has been in Craven County with our economic development initiative going on. We have found out that our employers and our parents and our students really didn't know where the resources were and didn't know how the resources were connected. And so the Career Pathways Initiative has allowed us to at least everyone gather in the same room, whether it be employers, economic development, workforce development, K-12, community college, and we all talk together about what we are doing and to make sure that we're not trying to overrun each other's programs, but also enhance what we're already doing.
Thank you. I think that speaks for itself. I'm going to go over here and get some feedback on strategy 3.
Hello, my name is Emily Hadley. I am here with the Duke College Advising Corps. For those of you who haven't heard of College Advising Corps is a program that places recent college graduates in generally low-income high schools in North Carolina. For those of you who are college students in the room, if you're at NC State, Duke, Davidson, or UNC, they all have corps, and I would encourage you to think about doing this program. One of the things that we get to do is we talk a lot about students with their career and college options. Our goal is to ensure that every student understands that college is an option for them, whether that's 2 or 4 year, so they get to choose whether or not college is going to be their next step. At my table, we talked a lot about project-based learning. One of my partners at the table is actually a teacher at a charter school in Raleigh who uses project-based learning right now. We had an NC State student who talked about how influential project-based learning could have been in her high school experience. We also had an employer who said he would love to have more students participate in project-based learning. As somebody who works directly with high school students frequently, I work in an agricultural county. It's Sampson County. We're the second largest county in the state. We're the largest producer of turkeys and the second largest producer of hogs. That's the biggest career that my students know to go into is swine and agricultural management. I would love to see more project-based learning that would expose my students to careers in Raleigh, Chapel Hill, Durham, tech careers that many of them have never heard of, but are only an hour away from where they live. But one of the conversations that we didn't quite have, but I would love to hear about, is whether you believe project-based learning was a good initiative, but whether it should come from the local level or the state level. Is this something that we should allow local communities to choose, or would this be better from a state level implementation, especially in a rural community where the school policies do not change very much?
Okay. So anybody on the panel want to take that local flexibility, state mandate question up? As we know, currently today, it's left up to local
I'll try to tackle it a little bit, and I know there's a difference between project-based learning and work-based learning, but I will tell you that we hear from businesses across the state that one of the major best programs that they can engage in is apprenticeship, and that is work-based learning at its best. And we had some issues with apprenticeship where we have made major changes in our apprenticeship program over the past 2 years. Back in 2009, there was a requirement from the legislature that every apprentice would have to pay a $50 fee to be an apprentice. Well, the current legislature has now removed that $50 fee, and because of the changes and improvements we've made over the past 2 years, we think in addition to removing the $50 fee, our interest in apprenticeship has taken an increase. So apprenticeship, what companies have told us is it's how they address the skills gap, because it encourages a student to gain education while they're earning, while they're making money. Plus they can leave high school with possibly an associate's degree, plus they've got that experience, and it's just a tremendous program. The problem is not everyone knows about it, so we've got to get the word out. We've got to use our resources to let everyone know that it's such a valuable part of success in business and in education. We do this in conjunction with DPI and the community college and the workforce boards and our NCWorks career centers. And I'll just touch on one more thing, and that is North Carolina has one of, if not the very best, community college system in the United States. And we need to remember that and take advantage of it and use the resources. Our customized training program, we get questions from all over the nation about wanting to replicate our customized training program, because we're really good at it and our people are passionate about it and they know what they're doing. So we need to really take advantage of that, and that goes along with work-based and project-based learning. So we need to just use those resources everywhere we possibly can.
Jose, were you going to chime in on this
Yeah, it was.
requirement option question?
Well, I think most of us probably agree it's better at the local. Once you start taking anything up, it becomes sometimes convoluted. But project-based learning is no doubt, I mean, over the last 20 years, a lot of research has been done on project-based learning. It's a very powerful learning strategy. I've had the privilege of observing how powerful it is at our local STEM early college, the Wake STEM Early College High School. And one of the things that makes it very effective is that there's a very strong business advisory board. And that business advisory board is very heavily engaged in helping faculty, the teachers, come up with projects. And then the business advisory board members come to the students' presentations and their preparation to serve as sort of authentic audience. And so that's very, very powerful. And of course, they help with work-based learning and internships and those kind of things as well. The challenge in rural areas is obvious, like you just pointed out. So if there's some way that we could creatively think about how we can have businesses become more involved in our rural schools so that they can be, as one of the speakers said earlier, they can be made aware, exposed to the alternative kinds of career opportunities, that's the key. Project-based learning integrates the curriculum. It also provides opportunities for students to be leaders of group work and projects, and it serves other aspects of development, such as developing creativity, innovation, and in our case, I've seen it where they've asked the students to take it on as a sort of entrepreneurial project. How would you actually market this? How would you sell it to someone who's, so all of those are benefits of project-based learning, and I just think it's a really, really wonderful strategy.
So what about barriers? Is anybody standing behind the mic here who looked at Strategy 3 and your table really identified some barriers?
Sure. So I'm Travis Starkey. I'm here with Teach for America Eastern North Carolina, and I can co-sign on everything that was said about Sampson County. And one thing from a demographic standpoint that I would like for us to maybe talk more about perhaps tomorrow is the significant and growing Latino and Central American population that exists in Sampson County and in our other rural some of our other rural counties as well. But in terms of barriers, we came up against, we're at a table full of educators and folks working in education, and we talked a lot about the silos that exist just in terms of an individual student's experience as they progress through the school day. So as you bounce around from subject to subject, there are plenty of opportunities to integrate the various subjects into an individual project, and yet there's not always space for teacher collaboration or the resources necessary, or even the school day schedule necessary to actually bring that to fruition. So I'd just highlight that as the most major one we came up with.
Terrific, thank you. Any other barriers?
Hi there. My name is Joni Winterkamp, and I'm with Iredell Statesville Schools. I am the district work-based learning coordinator for our district. This was actually not our strategy that we selected, although I do want to comment on some of the barriers that I personally find within working with industries. And one huge one is health sciences. We have many students, I have many students that would love to intern and do intern in various places. We always run into the HIPAA/OSHA issue. Ortho Carolina is an industry, it's a huge company, obviously, that I have been able to gone through, and they found a way where our students will actually go to their employee orientation and take that HIPAA/OSHA training, so that's a great thing. But in addition to what I'm really finding is because there are so many college interns, so many students that need clinicals in some of the larger hospitals and some of the larger corporations, they can't really talk to the high school students as much as I would like. I believe that project-based learning is essential for students in their learning, but for some of the high school students really trying to figure out where they can go, if those businesses can open their doors to us a little bit more. And I understand there's a bottleneck, and that seems to be a huge barrier with that industry, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you. So anyone on the panel with experience on getting behind or beyond those barriers?
I want to address first, we might need to discuss what do we mean by project-based learning. Project-based learning is a method that can be done without working with a business. That's why you can do it all the way down with kinders. The whole idea behind project-based learning, it is my passion, is because it mandates student engagement and it relates whatever they're studying to real life. That's why we're losing students. They see school as boring and not important. But with a good project-based learning unit, the students are relating to a real problem in their community, or it could be in another state, or it could be in a metro area, but the problem is real, and they see that the work they're doing and the learning they're doing is important. And just like you're only sitting here because you think you can use what you're going to learn, if you're not going to use it, you would have already left.
And I think I can address a little bit on the internships. You know, from a corporate perspective, interns cost money. And so when you're bringing on interns, you're also looking at the return on investment. And the return on investment obviously is going to be higher when you have interns coming from a college education versus a high school education. With that said, I think that speaks specifically towards large industry. I think one place that we have a lot of untapped opportunities for high school students is in small companies. We have a lot of small companies in North Carolina, and in a small company you tend to have a single person with responsibilities that span across a lot of operations in the company, as opposed to large companies where you have a lot of individuals with singular responsibilities. And I think it's in those small companies you can actually find a place of value for high school students to contribute and actually have a return on that investment. And I'm not aware of any programs that actually specifically go to small companies to look for internships for high school students.
And you're right. The smaller companies do help me quite a bit, and that is a great avenue, although some of the smaller companies are going with the larger corporations because of the change in the healthcare system. So that becomes a larger barrier as we're going forward.
I think in the healthcare industry, with increase in personalized medicine,
Right.
and a lot of physicians opting out of some of the payer programs that exist today and more into concierge medicine, you might find some of those opportunities increasing over the next 10 or 15 years.
So let's go to strategy 4. We have a party at 5:30 and we will be done in time for that. Some feedback on strategy 4, impacts, barriers.
Sure. My name is Teresa Peary, and I am with Wake Education Partnership. Our table talked a lot about strategy 4. We were particularly moved by the presentations about the benefit of a diverse workforce to an employer. We also were intrigued by the things that we heard going on in Austin and in Charlotte. And so for us, what we see is the need to increase that access, that equity, not just for race and gender, but for all kinds of learners. Because what we realize is when there is not that access, of course there is loss of hope. Moreover, there's loss of the greatest potential that North Carolina has, and that is its human capital. So for us, this is absolutely important that it be equitable across the state. Our table happened to represent a variety of locales here in North Carolina, and making sure that all of North Carolina's children, all of its students, see the opportunity to be creative contributors to our economy and to our state was very important to us as a table.
Thank you. That's what I thought. Well said. Strategy 4?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Alfred White. I represent the Innovate NC, Wilmington and Carolina Coast Council, as well as my employer, Bank of America. One thing that we found interesting about the increase in education and system equity is when you think about, and one gentleman spoke about it last, was when you think about capital. Companies, and I represent the private sector, so I'm glad to advocate for this, but companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every year pooling for external candidates to bring into their company to grow and develop it. What if we were able to take that and create a partnership and drive that money into the schools, generate a specialized workforce that comes right out of the schools, no matter whether you're seeking an associate's or an undergraduate or a master's level. We retain you within our company, and then we grow and develop you, and if you have a specialized skill that you choose to pursue within that company, you can choose to grow within that company and don't have to bounce around looking elsewhere. When you think about human capital, the biggest investment is the people. And I think that if we could look at forging that partnership and creating that connection and rolling some of that money to give our K through 12 system the support, and then also roll it into the community colleges and universities, we might see the adverse effect of what we're facing right now. Thank you.
All righty. Will?
I'll just, if I might cite an example of something similar, I think it's tied to what you're referring to about human capital being so valuable, particularly within where you're finding more difficult to find human capital for skills, and I'll say for skills trades. I'm going to give you an example called the Furniture Academy, and that is in Hickory, where there were 5 furniture companies that had been competing against each other for the same labor market for generations. Not for decades, but for generations, and they would pay 10, 15, 20 cents, maybe $1 an hour or more for mechanics, electricians, electronics, people specializing in the furniture industry. Well, this group got together, and they got together with a collaboration between the NC Works Career Centers, the workforce boards, community colleges, economic development, and the businesses themselves. They sat down and they said, we have a problem where we need to address this for our own future going forward. They created what's called the Furniture Academy. And that's where they teach specialized skills in the furniture business. And they started this, they had an action plan put together, very sophisticated, very well-oiled plan, started at January of 2014. 6 months later, they graduated their first 100 graduates. And then those 5 companies shared those graduates amongst them. So they kind of they helped to help themselves by doing that. And they did it on a local basis. It was a local level, the community got together, and they decided they were going to do something about their issue. So I think that addresses part of what you're talking about. But I will share with you, not only did they do that, we're now looking at the same kind of program to replicate that program in a place called, in Robeson County, with Robeson Technical Works, to do something similar. Well, we're not all satisfied with all of that. We're also now creating what's called the Manufacturing Academy that will do the same thing. So the point I want to make is all of these programs can happen on a local basis. So we want to make sure that people know that these services and resources are available, and you can make it happen on a local basis. So that's just an example, and that happened here in North Carolina, and it's a tremendously successful program, but it's collaboration with all of those groups: workforce, community colleges, economic development, workforce boards, NC Works, it all works.
Do we have a barrier for strategy 4?
Can I add something to that? Because I think the example that you gave was just a really sort of classic example of a movement that's been going on for social change across the country in many cities and states called collective impact. And that's the recognition that we can't do this in isolation. And the more we do in isolation, the more we compete with each other. That's businesses and schools and nonprofits and community-based organizations and faith-based organizations working collectively, agreeing to the same goal, sharing resources, do reinforcing sort of strategies, and then measure their success with devised shared metrics. And I think that's a great example of how this community came together in a collective impact sort of strategy and actually achieved, a shared goal. So I think your question and your point in this example illustrate that we need to work collaboratively. We need to work, across sectors to move the needle.
So I'm going to beg the forgiveness of the folks who are still standing here. I'm going to ask you to work collaboratively with me as I switch to strategy 5. And let's just hear a couple of folks give feedback on strategy 5.
Well, in the interest of time, we decided to share our strategy 5 thoughts. So
talk about collaboration. Love these people.
So I'm Tara May, I'm from ETP.
And I'm Bridget Raspberry. I am with the nonprofit CED industry.
So my table was made up of business leaders and higher education leaders, and we really focused on this idea of self-ownership and career development as a tool that's necessary to make all of the other strategies work. That's what will give agency to the students to be able to take advantage of these other strategies. We are particularly interested in the idea of self-assessment and thinking about how to create opportunities for a workforce that might change jobs every year or every 2 years in the future.
Okay. And so one of the things that we, at our table, and we had college students, we also had persons who worked in education and the business corporate sector. We talked about barriers to this strategy, and we thought that and many of the speakers mentioned this earlier today, the biggest barrier we think to this strategy is the current culture and the ideologies that we hold on to so tightly, and people are kind of resistant to giving those up. We think that that will perhaps hinder us in moving forward in this particular strategy. And an example of that might be fears that might be held by parents who fear that they won't be able to support their children, and giving up that control to the child to be self-directed in terms of their education, and also maybe even some educators who are fearful that they can't keep pace as well, and may somehow or another not be able to navigate the ways in which we would need to measure success going forward.
And so one concern we had with our barrier is how might this strategy increase the urban-rural divide?
Anybody want to take a stab at responding to that?
We had the discussion at our table between 4 and 5, and we didn't feel you could do 5 without 4. You had to have the equity first, which the whole socioeconomic equity before you can do 5.
So folks, now it's time for you, having heard this conversation all day, many of these issues that have been raised this afternoon are issues that our speakers have provoked our thinking around. You've provoked your own thinking in your conversations at your tables. We came into the room today saying that we recognized we were going to have to prioritize. It would be great to have the resources, both financial and otherwise, to do everything all at the same time. But if you had to pick one of these 5 strategies, you had to place a bet that one of them would reposition North Carolina to succeed in the future of work, which one would it be? If you're looking for the question, go to the app, get the pulse. It's the final voting question of the day. I'm going to come back at the end of our final speaker's remarks, and I will share the results with you. While we're preparing for our final speaker, let me ask you to do 2 things for me. I did say at the top of this session that I recognize that we did not address everything that we could have addressed. And it's really important to me that we capture your sense of what was missing in this conversation. So you have that opportunity. Go back to the pulse. It says what's missing. Tell us. We're going to share some of that as we close out the program. With that, I want to ask you to help me thank this really brave group of people who decided they would come up here and answer any question you had, even though they didn't know what the question was going to be. Thank you.